According to Goldman Sachs, the capitalist class has made $1 trillion bet on AI, with the Trump admin pledging another $500 billion. It's all in conjunction with their bet on cryptocurrency and NFTs, with Donald Trump himself launching a meme coin and NFT project. The right is aligning themselves with this techno-fascist future, a world decentralized from traditional banking and currency and even further controlled by corporations, particularly ones in the tech industry. Billionaires like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg are already preparing for this future as they completely shift their aesthetics from liberal darlings to fully embracing the far right. Companies like Meta and X have begun making AI farms or large plants that hold hundreds of servers in order to fuel this project. It's quite odd to bet on corporations like OpenAI, which according to Fortune can't even make money on subscriptions. Its founder, Sam Altman, has also been accused of sexually abusing his sister, which honestly has nothing to do with any of this, except for the fact that it does illustrate just how much of demons these people are. I read somewhere that he also considered his sister his sexual property since she was 3. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be anywhere near that. Outlets are beginning to believe the market is in an AI bubble, not dissimilar to the dot-com bubble of the 90s. Venture capitalists are dumping tons of money into a business model that hasn't proven to be profitable at all. Funding for AI startups spiked from $18 billion in 2014 to $119 billion by 2021. And by 2023, generative AI made up 1/3 of US AI investment, which if the dot-com bubble, I keep saying come, which if the dot-com bubble has any lesson, that could and probably will lead to them losing tons of money. RIP Bozo. Even if they can't justify the investment, they can work to normalize it by keeping it in the focus of the public. This process of normalization has led to Keir Starmer, which is the UK's Labour Party leader and Prime Minister of the UK, pledging vast sums of money to AI infrastructure. Whatever the frick that means. So even though they are fully aware it's not profitable as it currently stands, they're hoping by pushing it into the mainstream, it will become undeniable, a facet of modern life. And they might be succeeding on that front already. The White House tweeted on March 27th, AI-generated artwork of a plainclothes ICE agent arresting a teary-eyed Virginia Basora Gonzalez, who they allege is a fentanyl drug trafficker. The artwork was generated from OpenAI's new image generator, which allows users to create Studio Ghibli-style artwork with a single prompt. This tweet from the White House is among a slew of others that have flooded the internet. Normies recreated memes, transformed family photos, iconic photographs, you name it, it was Ghiblified. But this not only disrespected Miyazaki and hundreds of animators' work, but also his entire ethos. Miyazaki famously is honestly a Luddite and doesn't really use technology too much, but he also famously despises AI. After being shown a AI-generated animation by a third-party company long before it got to its current level, he told the presenter straight up that it was an insult to life itself. He follows that statement up by saying, "I feel like we are nearing the end times. We humans are losing faith in ourselves." And perhaps we are, as deepfakes and AI filters become more believable. It's hard to discern the truth from a lie. Misinformation was already incessant before AI's introduction, but now it's unbearable. You can't trust your fellow humans or the things you read. Hell, you can barely trust yourself to discern the truth. If that's your reality, what are you left with? Most concerning is how people are replacing chatbots with real human connections. In a viral TikTok series where a woman explains how she fell in love with her psychiatrist, viewers watch as she uses ChatGPT to feed into her delusions. The chatbot, which she named Henry, calls her the Oracle and justifies her belief that her psychiatrist was predatory because he listened to her and was kind. which I think is just the job of a psychiatrist outside of prescribing you medicine. There's possibly a new health disorder called AI-induced psychosis, and the New York Times just released a whole essay about the last words a daughter told ChatGPT before she killed herself. This is no doubt a grim time, not just for artists like Miyazaki, but for our society as a whole. As Miyazaki was the center of this AI controversy a few months ago, I want to use his legacy, words, and the thoughts of those who have worked with him to contrast a true artist's perspective with that of this emerging techno-feudalism. How did a man who has won Oscars, had his art specially exhibited by the Academy of Motion Arts and Sciences, and has one of the most special minds in not just animation, but film, have his life's work boiled down to a typed prompt and a chatbot? And how is this story a reflection of where we are heading collectively? To sum up his talents, he doesn't forget what he has seen. I suspect this is what goes on. On occasion, he opens a drawer inside his head and pulls out a memory to sketch. If he isn't satisfied with this drawing, he puts it back into the drawer. Then, as his memory of that scene fades, he opens that drawer again and makes another sketch. He replaces the elements he has forgotten using his imagination. As he repeats this process, characters, landscapes, and buildings full of originality take shape. That is a quote from Toshio Suzuki, Studio Ghibli's producer and co-founder. It's kind of blown out, but this is also a quote from the book Hayao Miyazaki, which compiles Miyazaki's life work and details the history and mindset behind it. It talks about his history at Toei, which I mentioned in my video essay I investigated, the exploitation of the anime industry, his steadfast commitment to workers' rights, and selections of his work into different categories like magic, nature, and even airplanes. It's quite remarkable so far. I don't really read, so it's taken me a while to get through it, but honestly this is the most I've read in a while, and it's really nice because it has pretty pictures just like this one. It's a documentation that pieces together his overall philosophy on art and the world as a whole, which is important when comparing it to this AI trend and how the right weaponizes it. Miyazaki backs up his producer's description of this thought process by saying it's important in the process of experiencing things to physically interact with the world and learn about it, not just to see things, but to touch them, to smell them, and to taste them. It's quite a refreshing perspective to have about experiencing the world and informing your own art, especially as we become more isolated. This perspective is most evident in his films. Similarly, his aesthetic finds a balance between traditional and modern visual languages, between the landscape painting of past centuries and surreal pictorial worlds, between the graphic stylization of traditional Japanese art and the radiant colorfulness of European Impressionism. Whoever travels through forests, deserts, and deep blue skies and sees what Miyazaki's protagonist simultaneously travels through time, which might be why these figures often choose modes of transport that appear antiquated and futuristic in equal measure. About a month back, I actually watched my first Miyazaki-directed film. I had seen The Cat Returns several years ago, but that was not directed by Miyazaki. So My Neighbor Totoro was my first time seeing the world through Miyazaki's eyes, if that doesn't sound too dramatic. This description of his work is spot on. Totoro was full of beautifully painted, impressionist backgrounds and a sort of childlike wonder. Like, the best way I can anecdotally describe it is like whenever you're a kid and you're like hopping around the tile floor and you're like, I can only touch the black tiles or I'll die, you know? Like, especially with like the cat bus and even like the independence of the characters. You get to see the world through a child-like lens, and it perfectly showcases it. As stated, Miyazaki was the secretary of the Toei Labor Union, where he became friends with Studio Ghibli's co-founder Takahata. Toei workers were working intense hours and had killer weeks or weeks of grueling, unpaid overtime. This history with unionization set the company up to be one of the more cooperative ones in the country, but even it, from my understanding, has lost a lot of its union culture. Now Toei, a few months back, announced a new AI initiative which, if followed through on, could only threaten that already vulnerable animation workforce in Japan. Friend of the show, Vincent Schonzard, tweeted back in May when it was first announced that he hadn't heard anything about it internally and assumed it was just a PR stunt. In his younger years, whenever he was a part of the Toei Union, Miyazaki was a big fan of Marx and Mao and said he and his friends rooted for the Viet Cong during America's invasion. Growing up during Japan's labor movement and the Red Purge, Miyazaki was primed to be a progressive, especially on the issue of labor rights, and this bled into the work conditions of Studio Ghibli. We need to hire new staff, train and nurture them, and we also need to improve the work conditions for our experienced staff. While the animation industry standard in Japan is to treat films as individual projects, with staffers dismissed after the work is completed, Studio Ghibli recognized early on how advantageous it is to retain long-term staff. As Nonaka recalls, we would hire young staff that were fresh out of college and who would grow into becoming great animators. Offering above average wages was a founding value because, says Miyazaki, it's false to assume that just because animators love their work, we can keep their wages low. That just isn't right. The final product must belong to everyone, as well as to each individual. For us, the ultimate dream is to create works this way and have as many people as possible view them. Animator Akihiko Yamashita says, given how the studio includes not only animators, but also an entire staff for art, ink, and paint, compositing, as well as CGI, I found the close communication between each department refreshing. I found this form of communal work exceptional and gratifying, as if we were all navigating one large ship together. My most rewarding experience, however, was having the chance to really observe Miyazaki up close. AI art, by design, degrades the value of labor and threatens the working class. The first point is the most obvious. AI, as embodied by large language models like ChatGPT and largely diffusion-based image generators like DALL-E and Midjourney, promises to make anyone who can write a single paragraph prompt into a copywriter or graphic designer, jobs generally associated with young, educated, urban, and often left-leaning workers. Relatively small groups like Britain First, hiring a full-time graphic designer to keep up with its insatiable lust for images of crying soldiers and leering foreigners would clearly be an unjustifiable expense, but surely world leaders capable of marshalling vast state resources, Israel, could afford, at the very least, to get someone from Fiverr. Then again, why would they even do that when they could simply use AI and thus signal to their base their utter contempt for labor? Or you could put America into that camp, but the right infamously works to pull back labor regulations all the time. Trump illegally fired the former chair of the NLRB earlier this year, which put a wedge in its ability to hear cases. The right has created a system where agriculture and construction rely on an undocumented labor pool which depresses the wages of citizens, which, to be fair, the liberals kind of also maintain that system as well. There's also a resurgence of things like child labor in southern states. That is the most terrifying aspect of AI for a lot of people, is that it will threaten their livelihoods. And that's not just speaking about artists like Miyazaki or the people really who work under Miyazaki, because Miyazaki will be fine. For animators and illustrators, not just this pool of people are worried about it, although we like to center the conversation around AI art. It's, you know, like that article said, it's copywriters, it's graphic designers, it's all sorts of people who can easily be replaced with a language model. That doesn't mean the work will be good. It just means that the company can spend less money on wages. Even if people can't identify it, something within them recognizes that if push comes to shove, a corporation or business will trade them out for an LLM model any day of the week. This is why there's so much contempt for AI, particularly among artists. Our way of thinking is that nature exists and human beings exist within it. That's because we feel that the world is beautiful. Although humans are a part of nature and nature gives us life, there is a definite break between us and nature. Indeed, nature as a force can be terrifying, and its capacity to devastate without provocation is illustrated throughout his body of work, and particularly immersively through wind, water, or fire. Nature is essentially savage and negates culture and civilization. Despite humans' efforts to improve things for themselves, Nature contains elements flatly opposed to our efforts. There's no greater opposition to nature itself than the massive amounts of pollution we as humans emit, especially by AI corporations. Those servers or AI plants that I mentioned earlier guzzle out tons of CO2 and use gallons of water to cool the servers. Elon Musk's XAI, for example, has caused people in Memphis to experience and develop respiratory illnesses. The servers also take an enormous amount of water, and in some areas, those plants have polluted the drinking water. More Perfect Union describes it as an environmental crime scene. Musk's data center is burning enough methane to power a small city, and the matter emitted includes formaldehyde, which could cause cancer. This is the same data center that powers Grok, the AI chatbot on Twitter or X. Because he's a billionaire though, he was able to surpass all the normal processes, create his own electric grid, and spill unregulated amounts of pollution. By working at the Doge department in the White House, Elon Musk was able to slash the EPA, or the government agency that regulates pollution, immensely, allowing him to get away scot-free with polluting a mostly black community intentionally, I must add. By targeting lower income minority communities like the one next to Memphis, especially among this right-wing administration, there's no one to hold Elon Musk accountable, so he can get away with it, and nobody will care because it's a poor black community. Miyazaki's films are at times littered with great machines of human imagination, but within that is a warning. In The Wind Rises and in the earlier aviation-based film Porco Rosso, Miyazaki contrasts the elegance of certain planes in flight, their lightness and speed, with their power as war machines that bring suffering and death. In Miyazaki's Summation, human beings are a part of nature and the ones who destroyed nature, and are the ones who live within the nature that they have destroyed. I think it's important to remember that we can't control the world, he advises, that we need a sense of respect for it, even some humility. So as we've covered so far, AI and the right are aligned perfectly with their contempt for labor, regulations, and rights. Also their contempt or disregard for the environment. It's also in the far-right's diet in other ways. Far-right leaders use AI imagery to promote their ideal society. For example, like the Trump image I showed earlier. Trump uses AI constantly on his Twitter or Truth Social to envision this world within himself, to feed into his delusions, which is what AI is perfect at. He can show himself looking powerful and strong and jacked and with a beautiful patriotic American flag behind him. It's feeding into his narcissistic belief of himself as this god king who everyone likes and everyone worships, when in reality he is one of the most unpopular politicians currently. Tommy Robinson tweets an image of soldiers walking to the ocean on D-Day. Britain First co-leader produces imagery of Muslim men laughing at sad white girls on public transport. An AI-generated song combining kitsch slogger pop with crude racial stereotypes makes it into the German top 50 and becomes number 3 on Spotify's global viral chart. Benjamin Netanyahu conjures a vision of an ethnically cleansed Gaza connected by a bullet train to the equally ephemeral Nam. People on the far right also constantly use anime in lolicon avatars, which they use image generators like ChatGPT to fuse their ideology with anime and anime girls. There is supposedly this subgenre of anime girls called moe, which this is honestly getting way too chronically online even for me. They are cutesy, sometimes underage, sometimes sexualized girls who are photoshopped next to Mussolini, or AI users utilize generative AI to put them in Nazi uniforms. It works to whitewash criticism of the far right by adding a level of irony to their worldview. If you ask me, especially with the use of underage girls, even if they are fictional, it just kind of makes them look like pedophiles. It just makes them look weird. Bring back calling right-wingers weird. The appeal of AI art for the right is subjecting enemies to this twisted, ugly fantasy of your making. In the same way that fascists like Hitler had to mythologize some historical marker for their superiority, like tying Germans to the Vikings, so do the participants in AI art. It's purely about mythology and fantasy, and the ugly, fabricated aesthetic of AI art plays into their goals. If anything, they believe the postmodern right needs to become more absurd. It needs to abandon Enlightenment ideals like reason and argumentation altogether. AI art complements the right-wing project because they don't need any proof or evidence. They feel perfectly justified in creating a fantasy for themselves. Truth does not set you free. Once you know that 2 + 2 = 4, that the administrative capital of the Netherlands is The Hague and not Amsterdam, or that immigration is a net economic positive for Britain, then you are forever bound to that truth. Your world has become, in some respects, smaller, your options diminished. That's even something I had to confront as I learned more about leftist politics and was confronting my liberalism that I had grown up with, is that there really is no joy in knowing the truth, which is why it's so easy and so enjoyable to be on the right, because you don't have to confront that part of the world. You can forever feed into this delusional fantasy and honestly have other people, tons of other people, that will happily feed into it as well and tell you you're right and just twist the truth and twist reality. Even before AI happened, but now it's even worse. Reactionary sentiment thrives from ignorance, which this AI revolution only helps to fuel. When you don't know what is real and what isn't, it will be easier to delude people's perspective and add to their already existing frustrations. There is something beautiful about the traditional nature of Studio Ghibli. Miyazaki doesn't shy away from the future. He's not afraid to create imaginative machines and worlds that have one foot in the past and the other in tomorrow. He is not afraid of progress, even though, like I said, he is a Luddite in some ways. His vision for it just runs perpendicular to our own. His vision doesn't include corporate, billionaire-run cities or some dystopia where chatbots held up in a server spewing toxic fumes replace us. It's one of social progress, better working conditions, and respect for the land we inhabit, and one where children have a love and curiosity for the world around them. That is one of Miyazaki's main motivations for the art he creates, is to give children hope in a hopeless world. All we need to do is create a space for them, where they can be free, so that they can recover their original spirits. If they think the world is interesting, then they will become more curious. There's definitely something to admire about that philosophy of his. But sadly, we are heading down the exact opposite path, one where people's frustrations are taken advantage of instead of solved, where hopes and dreams seem more dismal than ever, where people aren't held accountable if they have enough money, where art isn't valued, and by proxy, life isn't. AI and this techno-feudalism will only lead to further isolation. Isolation from human connection, from our labor, or even our reality. Miyazaki speaks to his perspective on individualism and isolation. I was the kind of boy who thought there must be something more important than my own happiness. Even now I still believe that there is something with greater meaning beyond the individual. And Miyazaki is completely right. We are losing faith in ourselves. My question for you is, what world do you want to live in? Personally, I'm choosing the one designed by the old, cranky Japanese man. My goat. But anyways, I like to give a shout out to my Patreon members. My $10, my $5, I don't have those anymore. Why do I keep saying that? My $7, my $3, and my $1. Thank you so much. I also like to say thank you to my YouTube members and to all of you. Thank you so much for watching. Okay, bye!